we are so honored to welcome maritime disaster enthusiast Anna Lardinois, who owns Gothic Milwaukee, the Brew City's most popular haunted historical walking tour company, soon to be a boating tour company too. She's also the 11th Pfister narrator, and she loves to celebrate the best and sometimes the worst that Milwaukee has to offer. She is also the author of Milwaukee Ghosts and Legends and Storied and Scandalous Wisconsin. And if you're loving this virtual event with Anna and you're like, this is like the second best thing that could ever happen to me, I want to see Anna in person, don't worry, we have an event upcoming where she will be coming for her next book. So with that, so honored to have you back. Welcome, Anna, to the virtual space that we pretend to be Boswell Book Company.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super honored to be here and so excited to be able to tell these wonderful tales to you, maritime disaster friends and fans. So I am just going to click in here to a little slideshow that I have. I hope everyone can see that. This is a huge thrill for me to be able to share these stories with you. If you have taken tours with me or really even read any of my other books, you know that I love a maritime disaster. There's something about being on the water that you're already in peril and then things just get worse, and that is very exciting to me. When this book was offered to me, I thought that it was a dream come true because I had actually pitched a book like this to another publisher, and they said, you know, regional history doesn't sell very well. We want to work with you, but not this idea. And then this particular publisher pitched this idea to me because they were doing a shipwreck series. And I really thought, like, oh my gosh, all of my dreams are actually coming true. Like, I get to do this. And one of the things that I asked them is if I could please select any story that I like, because I wanted to focus on the kind of stories that the people who enjoy Gothic Milwaukee like. And those kind of stories are stories that have a supernatural twist. So that's the kind of stories that you're going to find inside of this book. Here are just a few of the legendary wrecks that are covered in the book. Probably maybe not the most well-known in Milwaukee, but definitely the worst maritime tragedy to ever occur on the Great Lakes is the Eastland. 844 people lost their lives on the Eastland, and it never even left the dock. It is a terrible story of a day that was supposed to be this amazing, fun picnic, and instead took whole families to the bottom of the Chicago River. There is a fun supernatural element to that story because when they were pulling these bodies out of the river and putting up fencing to make sure that it didn't get sucked into Lake Michigan, they're bringing all of these bodies into an armory. And that armory later becomes, no kidding, Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Studios. And it was long considered Chicago's most haunted building. So a little past, a little present, a lot of tragedy, but all fascinating. I don't think that I could tell stories about shipwrecks in Milwaukee without talking about the shipwreck that Milwaukee seems to connect most with, and that's the Lady Elgin. It is considered to be the second worst maritime disaster to ever occur on the Great Lakes. And many Milwaukeeans know most of the people who died were people who lived in Milwaukee's 3rd Ward. We will never know how many people died that night, but we estimate over 300 people. This tragedy impacted Milwaukee so much that not only did it change the Milwaukee political power dynamic, because all of these up-and-coming politically active Irish died, so they were not able to become that political force in the city, but 1,000 children were left orphaned in our third ward. Can you believe that? For just an accident on the lake that began as a party ends with over 1,000 kids being orphaned. And of course, there is a ghostly element to that story as well. Then we move down to the J.P. Griffith. That's the third worst maritime disaster. And it's a story that is very much like the story of the Phoenix that some of you may have heard me tell in the past. This is another ship that catches on fire while it's overfilled with people. And people are forced to decide, will they burn to death or will they take their chances in the water, even though they don't know how to swim? And then finally, the Edmund Fitzgerald, because that is the boat people ask me most about. A lot of us think that the death count was much larger than it truly is because of the famous song and how much we talk about it. But I think part of the reason that we remember the Edmund Fitzgerald is because it's so modern. It happens in 1975. It takes its entire crew. And the mystery remains that what happened between the time that they last radioed and within 10 minutes, they seem to disappear without a trace. Not only do they disappear from radar, even when sailors are looking out, there is not even a light that shows where they were. So it's a harrowing mystery. And of course, the song by Gordon Lightfoot, which influenced me so much as a kid to fall in love with these kind of stories, really helps make that memorable. So rather than just giving you a list of these historic wrecks, I thought I would give you a little sample of the type of story that's in a book. So if you are relaxed and feeling swashbuckling and you're having some rum or whatever else you think is the perfect shipwreck drink, why don't we kick back and hear a story? These are stories, I picked them because they might not be on your radar. And sometimes it's fun to hear about new things. These stories, what they have in common is they both have premonitions involved. The boat on the right, can you even imagine that little ship there? That is a real picture of people lined up to get on that ship. So that ship is sailing around the lakes, going into those smaller little fishing villages in Canada. And it's kind of a jack of all trades. So it is passengers, it is cargo, it's got it all. And it's going to be, like in so many of these stories, one of the last runs of the season. And the winds have been howling for days, and the captain is itchy to get out there because he knows that after this run, it's going to be closed for the season. There will be no way to do any of this transporting of people or goods. And this is going to be his last chance to make money for months. So he is chomping at the bit to get on the water. But the storm continues to rage, and all of these people are waiting for the boat to go. And some of them are waiting in hotels on land. Others are staying on the boat for days on end, just waiting for it to set sail. And that's a situation that these two newlywoods find themselves in. They are waiting to be transported to the husband's new place of work. He is a freshly graduated doctor. He found a job in one of these small fishing villages. And so he is going to start his practice there. On board with them is all of their furniture, all of his doctor office things. They are ready to start their new life. But as the days drag by and this storm continues to rage, his brand new wife is starting to get a sense that this is dangerous. She asks him, honey, can we just take a train? And then we'll have our items shipped. And he's a frugal man who's just starting his profession. And so he says, no, they've already purchased the tickets. And then the next morning, while they're having breakfast, she talks to her husband and says, I had a dream that you would not believe last night. It was so incredibly vivid. And in this dream, we sink and are never found. Well, the captain is walking by during breakfast time, which is when they're having this conversation, and he overhears this. And he comes up to the table and says, my dear lady, I would never put us in a situation where we were unsafe. I promise you that you will arrive safely at your destination and all will be well. And so her husband's like, yeah, listen to the captain. He knows what he's talking about. She feels unsure, but she's not in a position to have any control over the situation. So she just takes a big gulp of air, smiles, and goes along with it. The storm gives just a tiny little window that night in the wee hours of the morning. The captain sees the snow is not stopped, but it's not raging the way that it was before. So at about 3 a.m, the captain thinks, well, this is my chance. So people who are trying to save money, people like this young newlywed couple are sleeping on the boat. And other people are in hotels. So he sends off one of his workers to run through the city, getting as many people as he can. Some of the crew take a look at the weather and say, you know what? I'm sitting this one out. I'll see you next season. Other passengers say, it's 3 a.m, forget it, just leave without me. So he comes back with just a handful of people. The captain is eager. They go. And as they are riding the waves, that snow starts swirling again. And a lighthouse remembers seeing them drift by in a swirl of snow. The waves are heavy, but this little can-do boat is holding her own. And that is the last time anyone ever saw this boat above the water. That's the last time anyone ever saw a single person that was on board. True to this dream that she had, that boat vanishes beneath the waves. And the lake does not give up the dead. So they remain under the water, waiting to be discovered. And that's not the only dream that comes true in this book. Another dream is really one of my favorite stories from the book. It's the Western Reserve, because it has pretty much everything that you can like in a story. First, it has, a cautionary tale. It has a premonition. It has a little supernatural element at the end. It's pretty much the supernova of boat stories. It begins at the end of 1890. That's when it begins. This boat is owned by a man named Peter Minch, and he's a brand new millionaire. During a time when there's lots of brand new millionaires, he has a passion for the lakes. His father was a captain, and he was a good seaman on his own. So he gets the money to buy this amazing ship, and she is a record setter. She's fast, she's sturdy, she's got it all. And he decides towards the end of the summer in 1890 that he is going to turn a run on his boat to go pick up some ore into a pleasure cruise for his family. So he gets on his wife, his sister-in-law. They've got 3 kids between them, and they join the crew, and they're making their way through the lakes from Erie into Superior. And they make great time because the ship is very light when they leave because it's going to pick up a load. So they get through those lakes in about 2 days. And it's August. The weather is fantastic and everyone's having a great time. And then the winds on Superior turn like they do. And they find themselves in the middle of a rare summer gale. The ship is riding high in the water. She's just being punished by the waves. Peter Minch is urging the captain, hey, stop lingering towards the coast and the protection of land. This ship can handle anything. Take her out on the water. He keeps pushing the captain, and finally the captain does. And this ship is not up for the challenge. They find out years and years later, it's the steel. The steel is brittle. But that night, they were entirely surprised when the ship is being actually torn in half in the waves. And every time a wave pushes up against it, it pulls the boat further and further apart. They have a crew of 20 some people. They've got the kids. Even though this ship is breaking in half, the engines are still running as they're seeing the sides part. People are fairly calm on board. They're making their way into the 2 lifeboats. Everything is going to be okay. So they get off the ship and they watch this massive ship sink to the ground, to the bottom of the lake within 10 minutes. And they still hear and can see that the engines are going as it slips beneath the waves. And the waves are heavy and harsh. Within moments, one of the 2 lifeboats capsizes. It's the one that has the crew in it. So the boat that is all the family and the remainder of the crew rows over to where this lifeboat capsized. And they're scanning these monstrous waves, hoping to see some heads pop up, but they don't see anything. Eventually, one head appears above the waves. It's a wheeler, and they bring him on board. Oh, and now they see another. It's the captain's son. They bring him on board. Everyone else is lost. So with these 2 extra men in the lifeboat is much lower than it should be. It's too heavy. And they're riding these heavy waves. So they need to constantly bail out this boat. There's only 1 bucket on board. And they're in this terrible storm. So a few men still have their hats on. They take off their hats and they're bailing the water out of the boat. And they have to do it without end because there is no stopping these endless waves that are pounding the boat. They are freezing, they are exhausted. And then they see some lights in the distance. Their hearts flutter with happiness. It is a freighter. They're about 40, 50 miles from shore and they see these lights and they think, oh my gosh, we're going to be saved. So they collectively start yelling and screaming and waving their hands to try to get the boat's attention. But they're tiny. They're in the dark. They're in a storm. No one can see them. They have no lights. So then, just unwilling to give up, they try to light some of their clothes on fire. They take a shawl off of one of the women. It is so soaking wet, they can't get anything to light. It's just too far gone. And so they watch heartbroken as that freighter just drifts out of sight. And they have to continue to ride these waves and bail this ship. And it goes on for hours. The 2 women are clutching their children as tightly as they can to their chests. They still have their life jackets on. The men continue to work. They almost lose hope. But then dawn starts to break. And they can actually see a little glimmer of shore. And that renews their spirits again. So they continue to ride those waves. They continue, and every hour they're getting closer. They are finally probably about 2 miles away from shore, and a massive wave overturns their boat. They're in those final moments, they hear children screaming, men groaning with pain. The wheeler grabs a life preserver before he's tossed out of the boat. When his head pops up out of the waves, he is truly alone now. So of the entire group that left on the Western Reserve, there's only one man left, 25-year-old Wheeler. And he is exhausted. He recalls that he was drifting in and out of consciousness. It took him over 2 hours to make that 2-mile journey to the beach. And he finally washes up on the beach, and he realizes that he is still 10 miles away from help, because that's where the ranger station is. He summons up all of his strength. He lays there for a little while, and then he starts this 10-mile trek through the woods. He sometimes crawls on his hands and knees when he can't walk anymore, but he doesn't give up. And he finally makes it to the rescue station. He shows up bloody, battered, exhausted, and he knocks on the door. The men at the rescue station welcome him in, and he begins to tell his journey. And as he does, he looks around and he notices the faces of the men in that rescue station. And you can see one in particular, a man named Ben Trudell, is growing whiter and whiter. He's almost like chalk. And the other men are starting to look at each other. The story that this Wheeler is telling sounds awfully familiar to them, because Ben Trudell woke up in the middle of the night from a very vivid nightmare that a ship was going down near the station. He found the dream so compelling, he just couldn't shake it. So instead of going back to sleep, he got up, he changed his clothes, and he went to talk to the night watchman, wondering, hey, has there been a ship that went down? The night watchman said no. And so he tells about his dream, and the night watchman laughed at him, told him, go back to bed. Everything is fine. There's nothing going on out here. But he couldn't shake it. He went back to sleep, and he went right back into the dream, and he dreamed of a man rising up from the waves and pointing. He then dreamed that that man, a well-dressed man, shook his hand. When they hear the story of this Wheeler, it sends an eerie chill up their spine, because what he's describing is so close to the dream that Trudell had. So they go to the beach where the Wheeler washed ashore to see if they can find bodies, survivors, anything. They find the boat that the survivors were in, but it's empty. As they walk, they discover a few bodies, and there's a body laying face down in the sand. It's the body of a man, well-dressed. When that body is turned over, it takes Trudell's breath away. That is a man from his dream. And when they look at his engraved wristwatch, it's Peter Minch. It's the owner of the boat. Came to Ben Trudell in his dream. Years later, Trudell would tell this story himself, and he would sometimes add in the detail that when he flipped the man's body over, his hand fell into Trudell's hand, mimicking that handshake that he dreamt of. That is not the end of this story, even though it sounds like it might be. Some of the bodies are pulled from the water. Some of the crew are buried in a shallow grave on that beach. The wealthy family gets shipped back to Ohio, the ones that are pulled from the water. And that should be the end of the Western Reserve story. She's far too deep to ever come up again. But for generations, people have claimed that they still see the Western Reserve sailing near this island. They claim that this ghost ship comes out of the fog, and you can hear from it the sounds of laughter and talking, and she'll drift through the area, pass back into a cloud of fog, and disappear. So there are many people that believe that the Western Reserve is part of that fleet of ghost ships that still sail the Great Lakes. And you've heard me tell some of these other stories. You've heard me talk about the Rouse Simmons, the Christmas tree boat. That's another member of this ghostly fleet of ships that remain afloat in some way on our lakes. So those are just a little taste of some of the stories that you will find in the book. I want to give you one more story. Do I have time for that? I hope I do. And then after that, I'll take your questions. This has been a favorite of mine, and I won't drag it out. I'm sorry, I didn't realize how long I had already talked. A favorite of mine, it's appeared in a couple of different things that I've done. I like it because it has rumor and it has a modern ghost sighting, and that is really fun for a lot of people. So the Ironsides is a Milwaukee story because it's owned by a Milwaukee company, and it was this amazing pleasure ship that also hauled cargo. But she looked great above the water. Below the water, she was not great. She needed repair, but the company that owned her was cheap. And so they were with the philosophy of why replace a board when you can smack another layer of paint on it. And that was the condition of the Ironside when she was setting sail that last summer. On board was a young woman named Mrs. Valentine. She had a little tiny boy, a toddler, a beautiful angelic child, baby Henry Valentine, named after his dad, who worked for the company that owned this ship. And he buys his wife and his child a passage on this ship, thinking he's giving them this amazing treat to go from Milwaukee to Grand Haven, Michigan. Now, as a working man, he can't join them, but he gets his baby dressed up in a little sailor outfit. They go down to the lake. He watches his family get on board. They could not be more thrilled. And he leaves, convinced that they're going to be safe because he's purchased them tickets on the safest of all the boats on the lake. Well, I'm telling you a story about a maritime disaster, so you know it doesn't work out that way. This is another situation where a rare summer storm catches a boat, and this boat just was not sturdy enough to handle it because the winds and waves are twisting this boat in the water, but she doesn't have the ability to fight off the cracks that are coming from all of this twisting and turning. They have all of the pumps going on the ship. It doesn't do it. Eventually, the boat is flooding so much that the engines die. And that's when the captain knows he needs to abandon the ship. Now, fortunately for the people aboard, there are plenty of lifeboats and plenty of life jackets. So they think this doesn't necessarily have to be a tragedy. But these boats are incredibly lightweight, and they're toys in this heavy water. The waves are too much, the wind is capsized. And they are lost. A few of these boats make it to shore. One of them does have a captain in it, and he sends out a rescue crew to go out to this area to see if there are any survivors, if they can find anything. And at this point, they're just collecting corpses. They find the mother. but they can't find the little boy, and they are reluctant to leave this little tiny angel out there. So they dig around and they find him buried underneath the sand. But they're shocked when they pull his body up because it's completely unmarred. He looks so tranquil, it looks like he's sleeping. They place the little boy in his mother's arms and seal them in a pine coffin and send them back to Milwaukee. It is a tragedy, but there are many people who believe that little boy, his body may have been sent back to Milwaukee, but his spirit may remain out in that area that the ship was wrecked. They think this because, and this is a very modern sighting that happens in the 2000s. Every year in this area, there is a US Coast Guard kind of rally by Grand Haven. And during one of these rallies, the Coast Guard can hear the sounds of a little child calling for help. Well, they're Coast Guard people. They're not like me, some fanciful ghost lady from Milwaukee. These are serious people. And they hear this and they realize that they have to go look for this kid and they cannot find anyone. And they're so concerned that they are calling life stations to get extra help. And they're combing the area in the water. They can't find anything. But they know what they heard. They heard the calls of distress. So they start radioing to the boats that are in the area to find out if any of them have anyone in distress. There's nothing. The Coast Guard are reluctant to give up the search because that's what their job is. But after hours, they call it quits. And they separately talk about what could that have been? And while they're looking at a maritime map of the area, they discover that where they hear those cries for help, for rescue, well, that's where the Ironsides went down. And that's where parts of her still remain. And maybe the spirit of that little Henry, who was never rescued, even though he called out. So just another tale from the book. I would imagine that you might have questions for me and I could possibly have answers or I will make them up. So if you do have anything that you'd like to ask me, this is a great time to do it.
Talk a little about what it was like to write this book under a very unusual time.
Well, I have to say, I started this by talking about how this book was like a dream come true for me to get this contract. And when you have a dream, you kind of have a lot of vision of how it's going to go. And that did not really work the way that I had hoped. So I ended up signing this contract just a few weeks before everyone went on lockdown for COVID. So about 2 weeks before our lives changed forever. My dream was that I was going to be able to go to the Whitefish Shipwreck Museum and do a bunch of hands-on research. I wanted to write these in haunted lighthouses. I wanted to be the most swashbuckling that I could have ever been. However, none of that happened because I had to write this book in I signed a contract agreeing to do this in about, 5 months. So I had to honor that. And if it wasn't for the Bowling Green State University in Ohio, I don't know if I could have, because they have a great collection of maritime information and they allowed me to access it. Because our good friends at Wisconsin Marine Historical Society are very welcoming and allowed me to come into their collection. However, it is housed at Central Library, and Central Library was closed for the whole duration. So this was a really, really tough. If it wasn't for Bowling Green State and scores and scores of historical newspapers, I'm not sure I would have been able to do this. So which Great Lake has the most wrecks, I see? Well,
Mm.
it's so super exciting. It really depends on the way you look at it, because you can define that a lot of ways. But if we're looking at the most deadly, which kind of is, the most fun to look at if you're a ghoul like me, it, we are flanked on two of the worst. So Deadly Michigan and Deadly Superior.
And almost peaceful Ontario.
Right. Well, I mean, they have every lake has its own thing,
Right.
and but certainly these northern lakes have a lot of gales because, and I learned about the November Witch, which is something I'm totally fascinated by. It is the name of a storm system, and it is when Canadian air and Mexican air come up and mix. And that just churns the lake like a cauldron. And it really, the wind does howl like a banshee, and it exceeds hurricane level winds here in our little Midwestern areas. So if you don't know the lakes well, and you just think lake, we should really definitely think inland sea, think ocean, because many mariners say that the lakes are harder to sail than stretches of the ocean.
Melissa asked is why Lake Michigan is considered dangerous for sailors. So that's tying into that question. And my parallel question is, you said what the most deadly lakes are. What's the perception like in terms of sailors as to, do they think that Michigan is the deadliest lake?
Well, I think that sailors consider like the lakes as a thing, and so there's like the shallow lake. By far Superior, it's incredibly deep and cold and dangerous. And the reason that they say Superior does not give up her dead is actually because the water is so cold that it doesn't allow the bacteria that eat the body, that cause the gases that bring bodies to the surface. So it's too cold for that. And so when people discover these shipwrecked bodies in Superior, they are kind of frozen in time because the lake keeps them so cold they don't deteriorate.
Linda asked about, she asked a number of questions, but one of
Well,
them
she's
is,
fabulous.
Linda, you're great. She wanted to know what you mentioned, just tying into what you said, what kind of reclaiming of these ships, recovering of these ships has there been? About what percentage of the wrecks are recovered?
Oh, well, I don't know that we'll ever know. They estimate that over 30,000 ships have sunk on the Great Lakes. I'm sorry, over 5,000 ships, over 30,000 sailors have died. And we continue to discover things. There are these famous lost ships that we still haven't discovered. So who truly knows what lurks under all of that water? But it's very exciting. And here in the area, we've got some really great shipwrecks that have recently been declared a nationally protected site. Many wrecks, like the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, is considered a burial site. So it's a protected grave site, and they do not allow diving. But a lot of these wrecks are so deep that they're beyond recreational divers, and they really need people that are have much more skill and specialized equipment to get to it.
Yes, I'm thinking of who was the gentleman who used to, Robert Ballard? Is he the guy who used to go after the shipwrecks, the Titanic and that kind of thing?
I don't know, but there are people.
Those are not lake wrecks. Those were ocean.
Yeah.
So different expertise.
Yeah, we were talking earlier because Daniel and I were talking about songs of maritime disasters, and he mentioned the Calypso, and they use the Calypso on the lakes to locate some wrecks.
Oh, so it was fair to put it on.
Yeah, no, it was. It's just not on my list.
Yeah. I mean, because it's like, it doesn't feel like anything's wrecking in that song. It
Right.
seems very hopeful. You have your soundtrack and are you going to play the soundtrack when you give your boat tour then?
I do. So every Thursday through the end of summer, I am with Milwaukee Boat, and we're doing a Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes tour, which I know sounds a little, maybe not the best idea to tell shipwrecks on a shipwreck, but I love to tempt fate. And so I hope that people will join me for that. And we'll sail down the river, and I'll tell more stories like the stories that I told tonight. And we'll also listen to some tales of maritime disaster and maybe have some grog. It should be a good time.
I'm going to put that, I'm sure everyone's actually already done the tour because that's what kind of crowd you get. But
well, this is a really new tour, so almost no one has done it yet.
So is the link to I'm sending you guys the link to the boat tour. And so the thing about all these links, because there's also one to buy the book, because all our copies are signed.
Yes.
And even though Anna already came in to sign them, she'll come back and personalize for you. She doesn't live that far from the store. So
absolutely.
Put your note, either call the store tomorrow, or if you do it on the website, you can put your request in the comments field, like who you want the book signed, inscribed to, and we'll get it done for you within whenever she's able to come in.
I'm able to, if you're buying books, I'm able to come in and do that tomorrow if you want it.
I'm coming hourly. It's 3 o'clock, come over. It's 5 o'clock, come over. I don't know, like let's at least maybe once, like have some limit, like once a day. Like,
well, it is a huge honor to me that people want to share these stories with their friends. And if you want a personalized book, it is a thrill to me to be able to do that. So thank you.
Oh, Mary Ellen asked about what museum you mentioned.
Oh, yes. So, okay, there is this Shipwreck Museum of the Great Lakes in Whitefish, Michigan. And it was just so much my dream to go there. They have a really big thing about the Edmund Fitzgerald. And I still hope that I have the opportunity to be there and even make up some research to do just to kind of fulfill that part of my dream. But yeah, it would be wonderful to be there.
Of course you're going there.
Oh, look it, and you already did that.
This is my special skill. Doing search engine stuff. Melissa wrote and said, I've been to the museum and it is fabulous.
Oh, did you see the bell? Were you there in November?
Melissa, write to us and tell us. Oh, and Tanya also went.
Oh, really? I actually know Tonya, and I never knew that about you.
Yeah, so, and anyone have anything to say about the bell, please let us know. Ballard, someone wrote Ballard, like Robert Ballard, yes, thank you. Those are good. They have like television shows and
yeah. If it's nerd stuff, I'm going to be into it. It's just nerd stuff I don't know yet.
That's right. Well, that's if we knew anything, we couldn't be inquiring nerds anymore.
Right.
We have to be know-it-all nerds.
No, it's always fun to find new stuff that you is totally up your alley. You never even knew about.
What was there any shipwreck that I know that these kind of books have page limitations. Sure. Was there any do you have a shipwreck that you liked, you just couldn't get in?
No, well, I mean, there were things that I thought, well, maybe wouldn't resonate with my readers, but was interesting to me. Or sometimes a ship had been talked about so much that I wanted to give people some new stuff. So I have some stories that kind of found me. There's a great story that I haven't seen covered in any other book about a man who they thought died in a shipwreck, but he actually somehow swam out of the Great Lakes and began a whole new life. He had a family that was on board this ship that sunk. Yeah. And so his whole family thinks he's dead. And he has started this whole entire new life in a, different part of the country. And then at the end of his life, this kind of comes out and it becomes, like a very newsy little scandal. And so I included that type of story in there. And a story that I thought was kind of funny about Stephen Harkness, who was one of the richest men in America, and that he was so chintzy about paying local people for their expertise that he ends up, for the cost of like $5, loses $1 million ship.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So some like I tried to add some things that are like, every book is probably going to have something about the Eastland, but not every book is going to have some of these other stories.
Linda wants to know what you're working on now.
Well, Linda, who also is fabulous, I have 2 children's books coming out next month. They're part of the Spooky America series. And I'll be introducing Ghostly Tales of Milwaukee with my very favorite bookstore ever, Boswell. And I also wrote Spooky Tales of Flint, Michigan for all those Flint kids who want spooky tales. So that is what I'm doing. I'm going to be, after Shipwrecks, I'll just stay spooky for the next few months. And then I'm not sure what will find me, but probably something interesting.
Excellent. They're on wants to know, did you come up with a new favorite disaster? Like, did something like, yes, you know what I mean. Okay.
Yeah, well, like things I didn't know about. So I knew that the Western Reserve was part of a fleet of ghost ships because I wrote about a ghost fleet, and that was a name that came up. But I had no idea about this harrowing experience that they had, or this man having to crawl 10 miles to have safety. So it became, I mean, this would be a whole entire movie, just such a harrowing 24-hour experience. So that took me, and then there's some pretty modern stories that I just was not aware of. And I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was a small town that a significant portion of their population died on the ship at the same time. And it ends up having like huge ramifications for life, for all the people that live in this small isolated town. It is a pretty well-known story. I made it somewhat different by talking about what happened after the shipwreck and how these major corporations that we actually still know about become part of the story and part of not bringing people in that small town justice.
Somebody wrote Carl Bradley. Eric wrote
yes. Thank you. I just could not think of it, and I didn't want to make it up.
So I had to leave for a second. I mean, I had to go in the other room for a second. And I wanted to know, I noticed there were a couple of comments about the painting behind you. And I thought, I bet you could pull it off the wall. I can see a little faster, but you could probably pull it off the wall and do a close-up maybe. Or you could do that.
Can you see it?
Yes. Yeah. So
okay. Can I tell you about how cool this is? So this is a picture of the Edmund Fitzgerald by local artist James Steno, who is truly one of my favorites and honestly one of the nicest men in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. I saw that piece and I totally fell in love with it. And then he blew my mind by saying he was inspired to make it by a story that I wrote for Storied and Scandalous Wisconsin. And so my heart exploded and I'm like, that I have to have that. And so I'm just so happy to have it with me tonight. And I still need to find a really special place for it in my house. But I wanted to put it behind me for now so that you guys could see it with me.
I feel like I ran into both of you at a holiday market once. Like the one maybe at the Domes? Did you ever do that?
Yes. I mean, I haven't seen a table that I wouldn't sit at and try to hawk wares. So I've been to all of them.
I did. My first 2 years, I did a lot of them too. I was telling you earlier on, I was like, I am very tired and I can't do as many of those I just put a link for Mr. Sino's website.
Oh, wonderful.
Since he's one of your favorites. You tell me what to link to and I will do it. I want to make sure the most important link is here. Did I do that at the beginning? Yes, to get a copy of the book. So,
right. And also you are generously providing a discount right now. Is that correct?
It is, right. It's 10% off. So it's an extra $2 for the.
That's $2 that you have for candy. That's what I am using with my extra $2.
Make sure you allocate it for would you like, is there anything that you, or I think we've hit our questions, but is there anything that maybe we forgot to cover? Do you think?
I do not know, but I do know that I am so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to tell these stories. And I'm so delighted that all of you have come to listen to these stories. Thank you so much, because without you guys, then I can't do this stuff, and it makes my heart so incredibly happy. So I just want you to know how grateful I am.
Well, Anna, we, my sister and I, as you know, went on one of your walks in the spring, and it was just delightful. And you are, I mean, and everyone who knows you, you are a gift to Milwaukee. So we're so grateful. And now your walking tour cards are now collectible.
Yes.
So you'll have to check the secondary market for that. Sure, the price is going up every day. So with that said, I think I want to remind everybody we should have just about all this, a little tiny bit of today's program. The 20 seconds disappeared. But all but that will be there, and you'll say it's the mysterious missing minutes. There must have been some sort of sea calamity that caused it.
Well, the ghosts follow me, and that could be it.
That's right. So Anna, we are so grateful for you coming today. We're thrilled about the book. We will have information about your next event soon.
Great.
And until then, thanks everybody for coming. Hope to see you at another event, or perhaps on a walk, or perhaps on a boat ride.
Ahoy, mateys.
Good night.